Good evening and a very warm welcome to Sleep Tales. Find a comfortable place to rest your head, close your eyes, and allow your body to settle. Tonight, we travel to a quiet city that exists in the soft glow between worlds. It is a story of love, of loss, and of finding a new beginning in the soil of memory. Before we begin our journey together, if you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps a great deal. You can also leave a like on the video and perhaps a comment to let me know where in the world you are listening from tonight. Now, let your breathing become slow and steady. Let the day fade away. Our story is about to begin. The story begins in the city of Penumbra. This city did not know the harsh light of a sun, nor the complete darkness of a true night. It existed in a state of constant, gentle twilight. The sky was a soft canvas of deep violet and muted indigo, with slow, shimmering rivers of silver light that moved like clouds. The air was always still and cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth, night-blooming flowers, and old stone. The city was a quiet place. There were no loud noises, only the soft whisper of wind through misty archways and the distant, gentle chime of unseen bells. The buildings were not made of brick or wood. They were formed from solidified mist and hardened shadows, their shapes soft and their edges blurred, as if they were part of a dream. The streets were paved with smooth, dark cobblestones that seemed to drink the light, making the paths feel ancient and soft underfoot. Life in Penumbra was slow and deliberate, a reflection of the city's own peaceful, unchanging nature. At the heart of this quiet city was a place of special importance. It was called the Grove of Lucent Souls. This was not a park in the way the waking world understands it. It was a vast open garden filled with trees that glowed with an inner light. Here, we meet Thea. Thea was a young woman who looked to be in her late teens. She had quiet eyes the color of the twilight sky and long, dark hair that she kept tied back in a simple braid. She wore soft, practical clothes woven from moss and moonlight, clothes that made no sound as she moved. Thea was a midnight arborist. It was her job, her purpose, and her entire life. She was the caretaker of the soul trees in the grove. Her life was a simple and profound routine, a cycle of care that she had followed for as long as she could remember. She lived in a small, curved cottage at the edge of the grove, its walls made of the same misty substance as the city buildings, with a roof of living, glowing moss. Every evening, as the silver rivers in the sky brightened just a little, she would begin her work. Each tree in the grove was a living, breathing connection to a person in the waking world. The trees were not made of wood. They were made of a living, organic crystal that pulsed with a soft, steady light. The color and intensity of this light reflected the emotional state of the soul it was connected to. A happy, hopeful person had a tree that shone with a bright, warm light, its leaves of thin crystal chiming softly in the ever-present breeze. A person filled with sadness had a tree whose light was dim and cool, its branches drooping slightly towards the ground. Thea's work was to help these trees, and in turn, help the souls they represented. Her tools were as unique as her job. She carried a pair of shears crafted from solidified moonlight. They were cool to the touch and weightless in her hands, and they could cut through the crystal branches as if they were soft stems. She used these shears to prune away the parts of the trees that represented negative feelings. She would find a branch that was growing twisted and dark, a manifestation of fear, and with a clean, silent snip, she would remove it. She would find clusters of small, sharp thorns growing on a trunk, a sign of anger or resentment, and she would carefully shave them away. It was delicate work that required a deep sense of empathy and a steady hand. After the pruning, she would water the trees. Her watering can was not filled with water. It was filled with a special dew that she collected from the happiest, most peaceful corners of the city. This dew was made of condensed, joyful memories. She would gather shimmering droplets from the petals of flowers that bloomed only in the memory of a first love, or from blades of grass in a field where children's laughter still echoed. This dew was potent. When she poured it onto the roots of a struggling tree, it would not just nourish the crystal. It would send a wave of comfort and hope back to the person in the waking world. She would watch as a dim, blue light of a sad tree would brighten with a soft shimmer of yellow, a sign that her care was felt, that a small piece of happiness had found its way into that person's day. Thea loved her work. She felt a deep connection to every tree in her care. She knew their stories not through words, but through the color of their light and the shape of their branches. She was a silent guardian, a solitary gardener of the human heart. Among all the thousands of glowing trees in the grove, there was one that was most special to Thea. It stood in the very center, a magnificent ancient tree that was larger and brighter than all the others. Its trunk was thick and smooth, its vast branches reaching up towards the violet sky like open arms. This tree did not glow with a simple white or blue light. It shone with a warm, steady, golden radiance, like the last rays of a setting sun. The light it cast was so warm and comforting that it felt like a gentle hug. The crystal leaves of this tree were the color of honey, and when the wind moved through them, they did not just chime. They created a soft, beautiful melody that filled the entire grove with a sense of peace. This tree was the heart of the grove, its golden light a sun in their twilight world. This tree belonged to Elspeth, Thea's grandmother. Elspeth lived in the waking world, but she was the only family Thea had ever known. It was Elspeth who had taught Thea the ways of the arborist, her voice a warm whisper in Thea's memory, guiding her hands and her heart. The connection Thea felt to this golden tree was the strongest thing in her life. It was her anchor, her home, her family. She spent more time with this tree than any other, often just sitting at its base, leaning against the warm trunk and feeling the deep, steady pulse of her grandmother's kind and loving soul. The tree was a symbol of health, of strength, of a life lived with grace and joy. For all of Thea's life, that golden light had been the most constant and reliable thing she knew. But one evening, as Thea began her rounds, her heart filled with its usual quiet contentment, she noticed something. It was a small thing, almost nothing. The warm, golden light of her grandmother's tree, the brilliant heart of the grove, seemed just a little bit softer, just a little bit dimmer. Chapter 1. The Fading Light. At first, Thea told herself it was nothing. Perhaps it was a passing mood, a momentary flicker of tiredness from her grandmother in the waking world. Such things happened. She had seen it many times in other trees. A bright, cheerful light might dim for a day or two after a disappointment, or a calm, steady light might flare with worry before returning to its normal state. Souls were not static. They were living things, constantly in flux. So she did what she always did. She tended to the tree with extra care that evening. She examined every branch, every leaf, searching for any sign of darkness or distress. She found nothing. The branches were strong and perfectly formed. The leaves were whole and clear. There was no visible reason for the change. She gave the tree a long drink of her most special dew, dew collected from a memory of pure, uncomplicated joy. As the shimmering liquid soaked into the ground, the golden light seemed to brighten for a moment, and Thea felt a small wave of relief wash over her. It was just a fleeting sadness. All would be well. But the next evening, the light was dimmer still. The change was no longer something she could dismiss. The brilliant, sun-like radiance had softened to the color of pale afternoon light. A subtle chill seemed to emanate from the tree now, a coolness she had never felt from it before. Panic began to prickle at the edges of her calm. She began a new, frantic routine. Every moment she was not tending to the other trees, she spent at the base of her grandmother's. She polished every single one of its thousands of honey-colored leaves with a soft, dry cloth, as if she could physically rub the brilliance back into them. The work was slow and repetitive. She would climb the lower branches, her movements careful and deliberate, and she would start at the top of a branch, working her way down, polishing each crystal leaf until it shone. But the light within them remained pale. The surface was bright, but the heart of the crystal was growing dim. It was like polishing a lamp that was slowly running out of oil. The beautiful melody the leaves made in the wind also began to change. The clear, sweet chimes were replaced by a drier, more brittle rustling sound. It was the sound of something becoming fragile. Days turned into weeks, and the decline continued, slow and relentless. Thea became consumed by her task. The golden light faded to a weak, buttery yellow. Then it became a pale, almost white glow, tinged with a sickly gray around the edges. A small, dark crack appeared on the trunk. It was no thicker than a hair, but to Thea, it looked like a vast, dark canyon. It was a physical wound, a sign of deep sickness or pain in the waking world. The sight of it made her feel cold and hollow. She tried to heal it. She mixed a paste of crushed light blossom petals and memory dew and carefully applied it to the crack. But the darkness seemed to drink the light, and the crack remained. Her work became a desperate, silent plea. She talked to the tree constantly, her voice a low whisper in the quiet grove. She told it stories of her day. She reminded it of happy memories she shared with her grandmother, moments of warmth and laughter. She hoped that by sending her own energy, her own love into the tree, she could somehow fight the encroaching dimness. But the tree did not respond. Its light continued to wane. The silence from it was profound, a stark contrast to the steady, comforting presence she had felt her entire life. She finally went to Kale. Kale was the head arborist, an old man who seemed as ancient as the grove itself. His skin was like weathered bark, and his long white beard looked like it was made of trailing moss. He had seen generations of trees grow and fade. He moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp and kind. He followed Thea to her grandmother's tree and stood before it for a long time, his hands clasped behind his back. He did not touch the tree. He simply observed it, his expression a mixture of sadness and deep respect. Thea watched him, her heart pounding with a desperate hope that he would have a solution, a forgotten technique, a special dew she did not know about. Finally, Cale turned to her, his kind eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored her own. He told her in his quiet, rustling voice that there was nothing to be done. He explained that what she was seeing was not a sickness that could be cured. It was not a sadness that could be soothed. It was the natural end of a long and beautiful life. He told her that some souls, when they have lived fully and given all the love they have to give, simply prepare to rest. The light does not go out in a flash of pain or fear. It fades gently, like a candle burning down to its end. He told her that they were caretakers, not creators. They could nurture a life, but they could not prevent its peaceful conclusion. Thea heard his words, but she refused to accept them. To her, it felt like giving up. It felt like a betrayal. She turned away from Cale and returned to her work with a renewed, desperate intensity. She ignored the other trees in her care, her focus narrowed to this one single fading light. She barely ate. She did not sleep. She spent all her time at the base of the tree, watching, waiting, and working. The crack on the trunk slowly grew, branching out like a dark web across the once smooth surface. The leaves, now a brittle, almost transparent white, began to fall. Each time a leaf detached itself from a branch and drifted to the ground, it made a tiny, sad sound, like shattering glass. Thea would collect the broken shards, her hands trembling, and place them in a small pouch, as if she could somehow save the pieces of a life that was breaking apart. The grove, which had once been her sanctuary, now felt like a place of vigil. The other trees seemed to watch with their soft, silent light, their collective glow a stark contrast to the growing darkness in the center. The end came on an evening when the silver rivers in the sky were particularly bright. Thea was sitting at the base of the tree, her hand resting on the cold, cracked trunk. Only one leaf remained. It was on the highest branch, a single pale point of light against the violet sky. It flickered weakly, like a distant dying star. Thea watched it, her breath held tight in her chest. She watched for what felt like hours as the tiny light pulsed, faded, pulsed again, and then faded for a final time. The last spark of light within the crystal went out. The leaf, now just a piece of dull, lifeless crystal, detached from its branch. It did not drift. It fell straight down, tumbling through the air, and landed on the ground at her feet. It did not shatter. It turned into a small pile of fine gray dust. In that exact instant, the entire tree went dark. The last of its pale white glow vanished, leaving behind a cold, black, crystal husk. It was no longer a tree. It was a statue, a monument to a life that was gone. And in that same instant, Thea felt something inside her snap. The deep, warm connection she had shared with her grandmother her entire life, the invisible thread that had tied their souls together, was gone. The space it left behind was not empty. It was filled with a sudden, crushing cold, a profound and absolute loneliness that was so intense it stole the air from her lungs. She sat there in the sudden, deep darkness, the silence of the grove pressing in on her, and for the first time she truly understood. Her grandmother was gone. Chapter 2. A Seed of Silence. The grove was no longer a place of comfort for Thea. The soft, glowing lights of the thousands of other soul trees, which had always felt like a community of gentle companions, now seemed distant and cold. Their steady, peaceful radiance only made the new patch of darkness in the center of the grove feel deeper and more absolute. The darkness where her grandmother's tree once stood was not just an absence of light. It was a presence. It was a heavy, cold thing that seemed to pull the warmth from the air around it. The silence it created was different from the usual peace of the grove. It was a hollow silence, an empty space where a beautiful melody used to be. For a day, and then another, Thea did not move from that spot. She sat on the cool earth, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the black crystal husk. Grief was a thick, heavy cloak that covered her completely, muffling the world and making it feel far away. The chimes of the other trees sounded faint and unimportant. The gentle breeze felt like a cold intrusion. She did not feel hunger or thirst. She did not feel the passage of time. She only felt the vast, aching emptiness inside her, a mirror of the dark space before her. Her own world had lost its sun, and she did not know how to live in the cold twilight that remained. Her routine, the simple rhythm that had structured her entire life, was broken. The thought of tending to the other trees felt impossible. How could she prune away a branch of sadness from another soul's tree when her own heart was so full of it? How could she water a tree with joyful dews when she could not remember what joy felt like? The tools in her small cottage, her shears of moonlight and her watering can of polished silver, seemed like objects from a different life, a life that belonged to someone else. She felt a profound disconnect from everything that had once given her purpose. The grove was her home, but now it felt like a strange and foreign land. The other trees, with their lights of soft blue and gentle white and warm pink, were like silent strangers, unable to understand the depth of her loss. She was utterly and completely alone. The cold from the dead tree seemed to seep into the ground, into the air, and into her bones. It was a deep, unshakable chill that no warmth could touch. She would watch the slow, shimmering rivers of silver move across the violet sky, a sight that had always brought her a sense of peace. But now they offered no comfort. They were just distant, uncaring lights in a sky that felt too large and too empty. On the third evening, Cale came to her. He moved through the grove with his slow, deliberate steps, his ancient staff making no sound on the soft earth. He did not say a word at first. He simply stood beside her, his presence a quiet acknowledgement of her pain. He looked at the black tree, his weathered face filled with a deep, sorrowful understanding. He had seen this many times before. He knew the shape of this kind of grief. He waited patiently, allowing the silence to hold them both. After a long time, he placed a gentle hand on Thea's shoulder. His hand was warm and dry, and the simple touch was the first thing Thea had truly felt in days. It was a small anchor in the vast, cold sea of her sorrow. Kyle finally spoke, his voice as soft as rustling leaves. He told her that there was one final task that an arborist must perform when a tree's light goes out. It was the hardest task. It was the task of saying goodbye. He explained that the dead tree could not remain in the grove. Its coldness and its darkness would eventually begin to affect the trees around it, slowly draining their light and their strength. It had to be cleared so that the space could be cleansed, and one day in the distant future, be ready for a new soul tree to take root. Thea looked up at him, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of pain. The thought of dismantling the tree, of breaking apart the physical form of her grandmother's presence, was horrifying. It felt like a violation. It felt like destroying the last piece of her she had left. She shook her head, unable to form words. She would not do it. She could not. She would let the darkness spread. She did not care. Kyle seemed to understand her silent refusal. He did not press her. He simply sat down on the ground beside her, his old bones creaking softly. He did not speak of the task again. Instead, he began to tell her a story. A simple story about the very first arborist who had learned that their purpose was not to hold on to life, but to help it move through its natural cycles. He spoke of beginnings and endings, of light and darkness, and how one could not exist without the other. He spoke of love, and how the greatest act of love is sometimes to let go. His voice was calm and steady, a gentle river of words that slowly began to wash away the hard edges of her grief. He did not try to make her feel better. He simply shared his ancient wisdom, offering a new way to see her pain. He told her that the tree before them was no longer her grandmother. It was just a shell, a beautiful memory made of crystal. Her grandmother's light, her love, was not in that dark husk. It was inside Thea. He stayed with her until the silver rivers in the sky began to pale, signaling the grove's version of dawn. When he finally stood up to leave, he placed a heavy cloth-wrapped bundle on the ground beside her. He did not say what it was. He simply told her that when she was ready, the tools would be there. Then he walked away, leaving her once again alone with her thoughts and the dark, silent tree. For another whole day, Thea did not touch the bundle. The thought of what was inside it filled her with dread. But Kyle's words had planted a small seed of understanding in her mind. The idea that this was not a destruction, but a necessary farewell, began to take root. She looked at the trees nearby. She could see it now, a faint graying at the edges of their light, a subtle dimming that she had been too lost in her own grief to notice before. The cold from her grandmother's tree was affecting them. Her personal sorrow was beginning to cast a shadow on others. She could not allow that. Her grandmother would not have wanted that. With a deep, trembling breath that felt like her first in days, she reached out and unwrapped the cloth bundle. Inside were two tools. They were nothing like her delicate shears of moonlight. One was a heavy mallet, its head carved from a single piece of smooth, dark river stone. The other was a set of long, thick chisels made of polished black obsidian, their edges sharp and cold. These were not tools of nurturing. They were tools of finality, tools for breaking things apart. She picked up the mallet. It was heavy in her hand, its weight a shock after the weightlessness of her usual tools. It felt wrong. It felt brutal. She stood up, her legs stiff from sitting for so long. She walked to the dead tree and placed her hand on its trunk. It was as cold as ice. There was no pulse, no warmth, no life. Kyle was right. This was just a shell. A beautiful, empty shell. She chose a small, low-hanging branch, no thicker than her arm. It was a branch she had polished 1,000 times. She remembered a time when it had glowed so brightly, covered in honey-colored leaves that chimed with a beautiful song. Now it was just a stick of black, lifeless crystal. She raised the heavy mallet. Her arms trembled with the effort, with the emotional weight of what she was about to do. She closed her eyes. She pictured her grandmother's warm, smiling face. She whispered, "I'm sorry. I love you." Then she swung the mallet. The sound was not the clean, musical chime of living crystal. It was a dull, hollow thud, a dead sound that seemed to be swallowed by the silence of the grove. The branch did not shatter. A network of fine, dark cracks spread through it. She struck it again, harder this time. The branch broke with a sharp crack, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. The piece fell to the ground, not as dust, but as a collection of sharp, dark shards that did not reflect any light. They seemed to absorb it, creating tiny patches of perfect blackness on the soft, mossy earth. Thea stared at the broken pieces, a fresh wave of grief washing over her. This was real. This was final. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not stop. She knew she had to finish. She moved to the next branch, and the next, and the next. The work was slow and arduous. Each swing of the mallet took a piece of her strength. Each crack of the crystal felt like a crack in her own heart. The pile of dark, sharp shards at the base of the tree began to grow. It was a pile of broken memories, a testament to her loss. She worked for days. The physical labor was grueling, but in a way, it was a release. It gave her a place to put her pain. She channeled all her sorrow, all her anger, all her loneliness into the rhythmic swing of the mallet. Swing, thud, crack, swing, thud, crack. The repetitive motion became a kind of meditation, a way to move through the pain instead of being consumed by it. She lost track of time. Her world shrank to the dark tree, the heavy mallet, and the growing pile of shards. Her hands became raw and blistered. Her muscles ached with a deep, burning pain. But she did not stop. She worked with a grim determination, her face set in a mask of sorrow. Sometimes, as she broke off a particular branch, a memory would surface. She would remember her grandmother's voice, telling her a story as she polished that very branch. She would remember the warm, golden light it cast on her face. These memories were sharp and painful, but they were also a reminder of the love that had been. They fueled her work, giving her the strength to continue the difficult task of letting go. Slowly, painstakingly, the tree came apart. The vast canopy of branches was reduced to nothing, leaving only the thick, dark trunk. This was the hardest part. The trunk was the heart of the tree, its core. It took all her strength to begin breaking it down. The obsidian chisels were essential now. She would place the sharp edge of a chisel against the trunk and strike it with the mallet, sending deep vibrations through the crystal. Large, heavy chunks of the dark material would break away and fall to the ground with a heavy thud. It took days to break down the trunk, working her way from the top down to the base. As the trunk grew shorter, the patch of darkness in the grove shrank. The light from the other trees seemed to reach further into the space, as if they were gently trying to reclaim the area. Thea could feel the change in the atmosphere. The heavy, oppressive cold was beginning to lift, replaced by the grove's usual cool, peaceful air. Finally, she was at the very bottom. All that remained was the wide, flat stump of the tree, level with the ground, and the deep, dark roots that were still buried in the earth. She was exhausted. Her body ached in ways she had never known. She knelt on the ground, her hands braced on her knees, breathing heavily. The pile of black shards beside her was a small mountain. It was the physical manifestation of her goodbye. She began the final part of her task, clearing the stump and the main roots just below the surface so the soil could be turned and cleansed. She put the mallet and chisels aside and began to dig with her hands, pulling away the last pieces of the dark crystal, clearing the soft, dark earth. It was here, as her fingers sifted through the soil where the very heart of the tree had once been, that she felt it. It was something small and smooth and cool. It was not the sharp edge of a crystal shard, nor was it the soft texture of the earth. It was something different. Her fingers closed around it. It was perfectly round, a tiny sphere that fit in the center of her palm. She pulled her hand out of the soil and opened it. Lying there was a single, small seed. But it was unlike any seed she had ever seen or imagined. It was not brown or green or tan. It was perfectly, impossibly black. It was not a dull black, like the crystal shards. It was a deep, velvety black that seemed to absorb all the light that touched it. It was a tiny sphere of pure emptiness, a miniature hole in the world. It felt smooth and cool to the touch, and it had a strange, subtle weight to it, as if it were much heavier than it should be. Thea stared at it, her exhaustion forgotten. She was filled with a sense of wonder and deep confusion. Where had it come from? She had never known the soul trees to produce seeds. They simply appeared in the grove when a new soul was born in the waking world. This was something new, something that did not fit with the rules of her world as she knew them. A small flicker of something that was not grief sparked within her. It was curiosity. It was a question in the midst of her sad certainty. She closed her hand around the seed, its strange coolness a comfort in her palm, and she knew she had to take it to Kale. She walked through the grove, her steps slow and tired, but with a new sense of purpose. The seed felt like a secret she was carrying. When she reached Kale's small dome-shaped library at the edge of the grove, she found him tending to a collection of ancient potted plants that glowed with a faint silver light. The library was a vast, circular room, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with shelves crammed full of ancient scrolls and heavy, leather-bound books. The air inside was still and smelled of dust, dry paper, and time. It was the center of all the knowledge the arborists had gathered over countless generations. Thea opened her hand and showed Cale the seed. He stopped his work and came closer, his old eyes peering at the tiny black sphere. A look of deep curiosity crossed his face. He gently took the seed from her and held it up to the light of a nearby dream lamp. The seed did not reflect the light. It simply stayed dark, a perfect void. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, his brow furrowed in thought. He told her he had never seen anything like it. For the next several days, Kyle dedicated himself to finding an answer. Thea would come to the library and sit in a small, quiet corner, watching him work. The period of waiting was strangely peaceful. It was a pause in her grief. She watched as Kyle pulled down huge, dusty books from the highest shelves, their pages brittle with age. He would lay them open on a large wooden table, the soft light of the lamps illuminating the strange symbols and faded diagrams. The only sounds in the library were the gentle rustle of turning pages, the soft scratch of Cale's quill as he took notes, and the quiet rhythm of their breathing. Thea watched him, a silent observer, the tiny black seed sitting on the table between them. She saw him cross-reference ancient star charts with botanical guides. She saw him read through long, forgotten oral histories that had been written down centuries ago. He worked with a patient, scholarly focus, determined to unravel the mystery. Thea found a strange comfort in his dedication. It made her feel less alone with this strange new thing. On the fourth day of his search, he finally found something. It was in one of the oldest books in the library, a volume bound in a material that looked like hardened night sky, its title long since faded to nothing. The pages were thin and fragile, and Cale handled them with extreme care. He beckoned Thea over. He pointed to a small, almost hidden passage of text at the bottom of a page. The writing was faded, and the language was ancient, but Cale translated it for her in his soft, rustling voice. The passage spoke of a legend, a rare and powerful event. It said that when a soul of immense love passes on, a soul that has given more light to the world than it has taken, it sometimes leaves a single gift behind. It was called a memory seed. The book said the seed contained the concentrated essence of that soul's love and their most cherished memories. It was a chance for a new beginning, a new life grown from the roots of the old one. Thea's heart began to beat a little faster. A fragile, trembling hope began to push through the heavy soil of her grief. A new beginning, a new tree. But then Cale continued to read. The legend came with a condition, a rule that was so difficult it was considered impossible. The memory seed could not grow in the nurtured soil of the grove. It could not be watered with memory dew or tended by an arborist's tools. The legend was very specific. It could only sprout if it was planted in the physical soil of a place in the waking world. A place that was once filled with great happiness for the soul that had passed, but had since been completely and utterly forgotten by every living person. A forgotten place of joy. Kyle looked up from the ancient book, his eyes filled with a heavy sadness. He explained to Thea what this meant. Such a place would not be in the safe, familiar center of Penumbra. It would be in the outer edges of the city, the uncharted and dangerous lands where the world became unstable, where forgotten things and lost memories drifted like ghosts. It was a place from which travelers often did not return. He warned her that to find such a place would be a perilous journey, a quest that was almost certainly doomed to fail. The chapter of his book was closed, but a new, terrifying and hopeful one was opening for Thea. The tiny black seed in her hand now felt like the heaviest thing in the world. It was both a memory of her past and the key to an impossible future. Chapter 3. The Uncharted Path. Thea sat in the quiet of Cale's library, the ancient book open on the table before her, the tiny black seed resting in her palm. The words Cale had translated for her echoed in her mind, a forgotten place of joy. The phrase was both beautiful and terrifying. The hope that had sparked within her was now a flickering flame, threatened by the strong winds of fear and doubt. She looked from the seed to the open page, then back to the seed. It seemed so small, so simple, yet it held the weight of an impossible choice. Kyle did not press her for a decision. He simply watched her, his old eyes full of understanding. He knew this was a choice only she could make. The library was a cocoon of safety, its walls lined with the collected wisdom of generations. It was a place of knowledge, of order, of peace. The grove, just outside its doors, was her home. It was the only world she had ever truly known. The thought of leaving it, of stepping out beyond the familiar gentle lights and into the unknown, was a cold knot of fear in her stomach. The outer edges of Penumbra were the subject of warnings and cautionary tales told to young arborists. They were described as a place of chaos, where the fabric of their reality was thin and frayed. It was a place where memories and dreams became twisted and dangerous. A place where one could easily become lost, not just in direction, but in oneself. For a full day, she stayed in the library, caught in a state of quiet paralysis. She would pick up the seed, its cool, smooth surface, a strange comfort against her skin, and she would feel a powerful pull, a deep, instinctual need to see it grow, to honor the memory of her grandmother. It felt like the last and most important task Elspeth had left for her. It was a chance to turn the finality of death into a new beginning. But then, she would look out the library's curved window at the soft, predictable glow of the soul trees, at the familiar paths she had walked 1,000 times, and the fear would return, cold and sharp. The grove was safe. The work was known. Her grief was a heavy burden, but it was a familiar one. The unknown was a different kind of burden, one filled with unpredictable dangers and the high probability of failure. What if she journeyed for weeks or months, only to find nothing? What if she became lost in the shifting landscapes of the forgotten lands? The thought of failing, of losing the seed in some desolate, misty wasteland, was almost as painful as the thought of never trying at all. She spent the long, quiet hours of the penumbra twilight weighing her options. On one side was safety familiarity, and a life of quiet, managed sorrow. She could place the seed in a small velvet-lined box. She could keep it as a memento, a dark, silent reminder of the love she had lost. She would continue her work as an arborist, tending to the other trees, her own heart always a little dimmer, a little colder. Her life would go on, a steady, predictable rhythm of quiet duty. On the other side was a path shrouded in mist and uncertainty. It was a path of great risk, of potential danger, of almost certain hardship. But it was also the only path that held a glimmer of true hope. It was the only path that could transform her grief into something new, something living. It was an adventurous choice, a leap into the unknown, driven by love and a desperate need for meaning in the face of her loss. She held the seed tightly in her fist. She thought of her grandmother's tree, of its warm, golden light that had been the sun of her world. She thought of its strength, its beauty, its unwavering presence. A life lived in fear, a life of quiet resignation, felt like a betrayal of that brilliant light. Her grandmother had lived a full, bright life. Thea owed it to her and to herself to be brave. The decision, when it finally came, was not a lightning bolt of courage. It was a quiet, firm settling in her heart. She knew what she had to do. She stood up from the heavy wooden chair, the movement feeling decisive and final. She walked over to Kyle, who was tending to his glowing plants, and she told him she was going. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. Kyle looked at her, and a small, sad smile touched his lips. He did not look surprised. He seemed to have known what her choice would be all along. He nodded slowly, his expression one of sober approval. He told her that the path would be difficult, but that a journey undertaken for love was never truly a waste. He then told her to begin her preparations. She would need more than just courage to survive in the outer lands. She would need tools, supplies, and knowledge. For the next several days, Thea's life shifted from the paralysis of grief to the focused activity of preparation. The grove, which had felt like a place of sorrow, now became her training ground and her resource. Under Cale's guidance, she began to assemble what she would need for her journey. Her old, soft clothes of moss and moonlight were not suitable for the unpredictable conditions of the outer lands. Kyle gave her a new set of garments from a deep, cedar-lined chest in the library. They were woven from a tougher, more resilient material, a fabric made from the spun bark of the oldest, strongest trees in the grove. The clothes were the color of a deep forest shadow, designed to be durable and to blend into the misty landscapes. The boots were sturdy, with soles made of hardened, flexible resin that would provide a sure grip on the shifting, uncertain ground. Next, she prepared her supplies. Her work as an arborist had given her a unique set of skills that would be useful. She spent a full day carefully collecting dews from the most powerful and positive trees in the grove. She did not take the gentle, nurturing dews she used for everyday care. She sought out the most potent ones. She collected the dew of courage, a shimmering silver liquid, from a tree that belonged to a great explorer in the waking world. She gathered the dew of resilience, a thick golden sap from a tree connected to a soul who had overcome great hardship. She collected the dew of clarity, a crystal-clear liquid that smelled of clean rain, from the tree of a wise philosopher. She stored these precious liquids in small, tightly sealed crystal vials, each one labeled with a careful, hand-drawn symbol. These would be her medicine, her source of strength when her own resolve faltered. A small sip of the courage dew could quell a rising panic. A single drop of the resilience dew on a wound could help it heal faster. She also packed her essential tools. She would not take the heavy mallet and chisels of dismantling. She took her familiar, weightless shears of solidified moonlight. Kale told her that in the outer lands, memories and emotions could sometimes take physical form, growing like wild, tangled vines. Her shears would be able to cut through these ethereal obstacles. She packed a small, sharp knife, a coil of strong, silvery rope woven from spider silk, and a fire-starting kit that used a special crystal to create a spark of pure, smokeless light. She prepared food for the journey, not the simple fruits and nuts she ate in the grove, but dense, nutrient-rich cakes made from ground seeds, dried berries, and a binding of sweet, solidified nectar. These journey cakes were designed to provide energy for a long time, and a single small bite could sustain a traveler for an entire day. She wrapped them carefully in broad, waxy leaves to keep them fresh. Everything she prepared was packed into a sturdy, waterproof satchel made of woven reeds, its straps wide and comfortable for a long trek. The final and most important tool was a gift from Kale. He led her to a small, dusty room behind the main library, a room she had never been in before. It was a workshop filled with strange and wonderful instruments, astrolabes that tracked the movements of dream constellations, hourglasses filled with shimmering dust that measured emotional tides, and delicate silver instruments for listening to the whispers of the past. From a velvet-lined box, Kale took out a compass. It was unlike any compass she had ever seen. Its casing was made of a smooth, dark wood, and its face was not marked with north, south, east, or west. Instead, the face was a piece of polished, milky quartz. In the center, a single needle-thin shard of crystal floated, suspended in a clear, thick liquid. The needle did not point in any consistent direction. It swung slowly, sometimes spinning in a full circle, other times quivering as if it were alive. Kale explained that this was an emotional compass. It did not navigate by the magnetic fields of a world. It navigated by the lingering echoes of strong emotion. He told her that all powerful feelings left a residue, a faint energy that lingered in a place long after the person was gone. The needle of the compass was attuned to these echoes. He showed her how to calibrate it, how to focus her own thoughts to make the needle seek out a specific emotion. He told her that for her quest, she must tune it to the frequency of joy. The needle would then guide her towards places where great happiness had once existed. It would be her only guide in a land without maps. Along with the compass, Kale gave her one last thing. It was a small, perfectly smooth, white stone, no bigger than her thumb. It was a hope stone. He told her that it was connected to the collective hope of all the arborists in the grove. As long as she held on to her own hope, As long as she did not give in to despair, the stone would remain warm to the touch. If it ever grew cold, it meant her own hope was failing, and she would need to find a way to rekindle it before she could continue. It was a small, simple thing, but it felt immensely precious. It was a tangible link to her home, a reminder that she was not entirely alone. She placed the warm stone in a small pocket over her heart. Finally, the day of her departure arrived. She was ready. Her satchel was packed, her new clothes felt comfortable, and the weight of the compass in her hand was both a burden and a comfort. She stood at the very edge of the grove, at the point where the soft, mossy ground gave way to the hard, dark cobblestones of the city proper. Behind her was the familiar, gentle glow of the soul trees, a sea of soft, welcoming lights. Before her, the path stretched out into the deep twilight of penumbra, the misty, soft-edged buildings of the city becoming less defined and more dreamlike in the distance. This was the edge of her known world. Kyle stood with her. He did not offer any grand words of encouragement or any dire warnings. He had already given her all the tools and knowledge he could. He simply placed his old, wrinkled hand on her shoulder and gave it a firm, reassuring squeeze. It was a silent gesture of faith, of trust, of love. It meant more than any words could have. Thea looked back at the grove one last time. She saw the space where her grandmother's tree had been, now a clean, empty patch of dark earth waiting for a new future. She thought of the tiny black seed tucked safely in a special pouch inside her satchel. It was the reason for this journey, the beginning and the end of her quest. A wave of fear, cold and sharp, washed over her again. The sheer scale of what she was about to do felt overwhelming. Her legs felt heavy, as if they were rooted to the ground. But then she felt the small, steady warmth of the hope stone against her chest. She closed her eyes and took a deep, slow breath. The cool, familiar air of the grove filling her lungs for what might be the last time. She thought of her grandmother's smile. She thought of the golden light. She thought of the impossible chance for a new beginning. She opened her eyes. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. It was a passenger now, not the driver. With a quiet resolve that came from the deepest part of her heart, she gave Cale a small, grateful nod. She turned her back on the safety and comfort of her home. She took a deep breath, said a silent goodbye to the gentle lights of the soul trees, and took her first step onto the shifting cobblestone paths of the unknown city, her face turned towards the deepening gloom. The journey had begun. Chapter 4: Whispers in the Gloom. The first few steps away from the grove felt like crossing an invisible, sacred line. The soft, mossy earth that had cushioned her feet her entire life gave way to the hard, unyielding surface of the cobblestones. The air immediately felt different. The gentle, flower-scented breeze of the grove was replaced by a still, heavy atmosphere that smelled of damp stone and ancient dust. The familiar, comforting glow of the thousands of soul trees receded behind her with every step, their collective light shrinking until it was just another cluster of faint stars in the deep twilight. She was truly on her own. The path before her led into the main city of Penumbra, a place she had only ever seen from the edges of the grove. It was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of empty spaces, of lives lived behind misty walls. The buildings were grand and tall, their soft gray forms reaching up into the violet sky like sleeping giants. The streets were wider here, and though they were empty, Thea felt a sense of being watched, as if the silent, windowless buildings held the memories of all the souls who had ever passed through them. She walked for what felt like hours, her new boots making a soft, rhythmic tapping sound on the cobblestones. It was the only sound in the vast, silent city. She kept to the center of the street, avoiding the deep shadows that pooled in the doorways and alleyways. The hope stone in her pocket was a small, steady point of warmth against her chest, a constant physical reminder of her purpose. She would touch it every few minutes, its warmth a reassurance that her courage had not yet failed her. She held the emotional compass in her hand, its wooden case smooth and cool. She had tuned it, as Kale had instructed, to the frequency of joy. The crystal needle floated lazily in its liquid chamber, mostly still, occasionally giving a slight, aimless quiver. There was no joy here. The emotions of this part of the city were too faint, too old, washed out by time and the slow, constant twilight. She was simply passing through, a tiny, determined figure in a vast, sleeping landscape. As she moved further from the city's heart, the landscape began to change. The transformation was subtle at first. The cobblestones became less uniform, their edges more worn, with thin, pale weeds growing in the cracks between them. The grand, misty buildings grew shorter, their shapes becoming less defined and more slumped, as if they were slowly losing their form and melting back into the gloom. The silence also changed. It was no longer the peaceful silence of an empty city. It was becoming a deeper, more unsettling silence, the kind that feels like it is listening. The air grew colder, and a thin, ground-hugging mist began to swirl around her ankles, clinging to her boots like a living thing. This was the beginning of the outer districts. This was the edge of the map. Thea began to notice the instability that Kyle had warned her about. The streets were no longer reliable. She would look down a long, straight path, and it would seem to stretch on for a mile. She would blink or look away for a moment to check her compass, and when she looked back, the path would be gone, replaced by a solid, misty wall. A new path would have opened to her left or right, a narrow, winding alley that had not been there a second before. At first, this was deeply disorienting. It made her feel like the world itself was untrustworthy, that she could not believe what her own eyes were seeing. She learned quickly that she had to keep moving, to trust the general direction the compass was trying to pull her in, even when the path itself was constantly shifting and rearranging. It was like trying to walk through a dream. She had to let go of the idea of a fixed and stable world and learn to move with the constant, fluid changes. The buildings in this area were even stranger. They were no longer solid structures. They seemed to be made entirely of a thick, swirling mist that had been loosely shaped into the form of walls and roofs. She could see the deep twilight sky through them, faint and blurry, as if she were looking through thick, milky glass. She reached out and touched one of the walls. It was cold and damp, and her fingers sank into it slightly, like pressing into a thick cloud. The mist clung to her hand for a moment before she pulled it away. There were no doors or windows on these buildings. They were just silent, shifting forms that seemed to watch her as she passed. Thea felt a profound sense of isolation. She was a solid, living thing in a world that was becoming increasingly unreal and ghost-like. She pulled her cloak tighter around herself, the tough fabric a welcome reminder of her own solid form. She ate a small piece of one of her journey cakes, its dense, sweet taste a small comfort, a connection to the real, predictable world of the grove she had left behind. She walked on, the landscape growing ever stranger. She passed through a district where the ground was not made of cobblestones, but of a soft, dark sand that muffled her footsteps completely. In this district, silent, translucent bells hung in the air, unattached to anything, tolling with a sound that could be felt as a vibration in the bones, but could not be heard with the ears. Later, she crossed a long, low bridge over a dry riverbed. The river had not held water for centuries. Instead, it was filled with smooth, gray stones, each one whispering a single, forgotten word as the wind passed over it. The air was filled with a constant, meaningless murmur, the ghosts of a language no one spoke anymore. Thea did not linger in these places. She kept her head down, her focus on the compass in her hand and the warm spot of the hope stone against her chest. The compass needle was still mostly quiet, but it had begun to twitch more often now, giving small, sharp tugs in a generally forward direction. She was getting closer to a place with stronger emotional echoes, but they were not yet echoes of joy. The real danger began when she reached a part of the city Cale had specifically warned her about. He had called them the Echo Lanes. From the outside, they looked no different from any other narrow alley that branched off from the main, shifting streets. But the air at their entrances was different. It felt thick and heavy, and a deep, unnatural cold seemed to pour out from them. Her compass, when she passed by one of these lanes, would go wild. The needle would spin and tremble violently, not with the gentle pull of a single emotion, but with the chaotic energy of 1,000 powerful feelings, all trapped in one small space. These were the places where strong, raw memories became stuck, replaying themselves over and over again in an endless, invisible loop. Kyle had told her to avoid them at all costs. To step into one was to risk being caught in the memory, to feel an emotion so powerful that it could overwhelm your own heart and trap you there forever. For a long time, she was able to navigate around them. When the compass started to spin, she would back away and wait for the street to shift, for a new path to open up that would lead her around the dangerous area. But the outer districts were not a kind or predictable place. One moment, she was walking down a relatively wide, open street, the mist swirling gently around her. The next moment, the world seemed to twist. The street behind her sealed shut with a wall of impenetrable fog. The path before her narrowed, the misty buildings on either side pressing in on her, forcing her forward into a tight, dark passage. She looked at her compass. The needle was spinning so fast it was just a blur of silver. She had been forced into an echo lane. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She tried to turn back, but the way was closed. The only way was forward, through the heart of the trapped memory. The cold in the alley was immediate and intense. It was a deep, soul-aching cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the air. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. It felt like walking through deep, cold water. The light from the twilight sky seemed to be swallowed by the gloom in the alley. Thea could only see a few feet in front of her. She took out her moonlight shears, holding them before her, though she did not know what she could possibly cut. She took a tentative step forward, then another. The silence in the lane was absolute. It was a dead silence, with no wind, no whispers, nothing. Then she began to feel it. It started as a faint sadness, a small, sad thought that did not feel like her own. It was a thought of loss, of something beautiful that was gone forever. She tried to push it away, to focus on the warmth of the hope stone, but the feeling grew stronger with every step she took. It was a tide of sorrow, rising around her, trying to pull her under. She began to see things, blurry, indistinct images that flickered at the edge of her vision. She saw the shape of a man's face, his features twisted in grief. She saw the pale, still hand of a woman. She saw a single white flower, its petals falling one by one. These were not her memories, but they felt intensely personal, intensely real. The sorrow was no longer just a feeling. It became a physical weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her own grief for her grandmother, which she had been carefully managing, rose up to meet this new, overwhelming sadness. The echo seemed to sense her own pain, and it latched onto it, feeding it, amplifying it, until it was a roaring, unbearable wave. She felt her knees grow weak. The urge to simply sit down in the middle of the dark alley, to give in to the crushing weight of the sorrow, was almost overwhelming. Why keep fighting? What was the point? The world was a place of loss and pain. This was the truth. This was reality. The memory was trying to convince her, trying to make its sad story her own. She stumbled, falling to one knee. The cold cobblestones felt like ice against her skin. She looked at her hand. The moonlight shears were flickering, their light dimming as her will began to fail. She felt for the hope stone in her pocket. It was still warm, but its heat felt faint now, like the last ember of a dying fire. The cold of the alley was winning. This was it. This was how she would end, a forgotten traveler trapped in a stranger's sad memory. But then, through the thick fog of the sorrow, another memory surfaced. It was her own. It was the memory of Cale's hand on her shoulder, his quiet faith in her. It was the memory of her own decision, the quiet, firm resolve she had felt in the library. She thought of the little black seed, safe in her satchel, a tiny promise of a new beginning. She would not let it end here. She would not let a stranger's sadness extinguish her grandmother's last gift. With a surge of desperate energy, she fumbled inside her satchel, her fingers clumsy with cold. She pulled out one of the crystal vials. The symbol on the stopper was a tiny carved sun. It was the dew of courage. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open it. She managed to pry the stopper loose and brought the vial to her lips. She took a small sip. The liquid was cool, and it tasted like sunlight and wind. The effect was immediate. A gentle, persistent warmth spread through her chest, pushing back against the crushing cold of the sorrow. It was not a fiery, aggressive heat, but a steady, resilient warmth that started in her core and slowly spread outwards to her limbs. The heavy weight on her chest lessened. Her breathing became easier. The blurry, sad images at the edge of her vision began to fade. The overwhelming sorrow did not disappear completely, but it receded. It was no longer a drowning wave. It was a distant storm, its power no longer touching her directly. She felt her own will, her own identity return. The sorrow was not hers. It was just a story. A sad story, but not her story. She got to her feet, her legs still trembling, but she was standing. She could see the end of the alley now, a slightly less dark patch of gloom 100 feet away. She began to walk towards it, her steps slow but steady. She kept her eyes fixed on the exit, refusing to look at the flickering shadows on the walls. She clutched the hope stone, its warmth slowly returning as her own courage grew. She did not run. She walked with a deliberate, focused calm, moving through the last remnants of the sad echo until she finally stepped out of the alley and back onto a wider, more open street. The air was still cool, but it was fresh and clean. The oppressive weight was gone. She leaned against a misty wall, her body shaking with the aftershocks of the experience, and took deep, shuddering breaths. She had survived. She had faced one of the greatest dangers of the outer lands, and she had made it through. She felt a new sense of strength, a quiet confidence she had not possessed before. The journey was dangerous, but she was not helpless. After resting for a long time, allowing the warmth of the courage due to fully settle in her, she decided to find a safe place to stop for a while. The street she was on seemed more stable than the others. It was a wide circular plaza, and in its center stood a single large petrified tree, its stone branches covered in glowing moss. The plaza felt calm, a small island of stability in the shifting chaos. She sat at the base of the stone tree, leaning her back against its rough, cool bark. She ate another piece of her journey cake and took a small sip of clean water from her canteen. As she sat there, recovering her strength, she heard a sound. It was a very faint, very strange sound, a series of soft, metallic clicks and whirs, accompanied by a low, almost inaudible hum. It was the first sound she had heard in days that was not the wind or her own footsteps. It was the sound of something mechanical, something deliberate. She looked around the plaza, her hand resting on the handle of her shears. The sound was coming from the other side of the stone tree. She stood up slowly and quietly and peered around the wide, moss-covered trunk. There, she saw him. He was a young man, perhaps a few years older than her. He was dressed in practical patched clothes and wore a pair of large, strange-looking goggles pushed up onto his forehead. He was kneeling on the ground, his attention completely focused on a strange device he was holding. The device was an odd contraption of brass, glass, and polished copper wire. It looked something like a large mechanical ear trumpet, and it was connected by a thin, flexible tube to a small sealed glass jar that glowed with a faint blue light. He held the wide end of the trumpet up, sweeping it slowly through the air, his head cocked as if he were listening intently to something she could not hear. This must be the source of the strange clicking and whirring sounds. Thea watched him, hidden behind the tree, her curiosity overcoming her caution. He seemed completely unaware of her presence. He was utterly absorbed in his task. He would hold the device still for a long moment, then frown and shake his head, moving it to a new position. He seemed to be searching for something specific, something invisible that was floating in the still air of the plaza. He was not a threat. His posture was one of intense concentration, not aggression. After a few minutes of watching him, Thea accidentally shifted her weight, and her boot scraped softly against a loose stone on the ground. The sound was tiny, but in the profound silence of the plaza, it sounded as loud as a shout. The young man startled, jumping to his feet and spinning around, holding his strange device protectively. His eyes, wide and alert, met hers. They stood like that for a long moment, two solitary travelers surprised to find they were not alone. He looked at her, taking in her strange dark clothes and the shimmering moonlight shears in her hand. She looked at him, at his patched coat, his messy hair, and the bizarre brass and glass contraption he held. He was thin, with a kind, serious face, and eyes that looked like they had seen many strange things. After a moment of tense silence, he seemed to decide she was not a danger. He lowered his device slightly and gave her a small, cautious nod. Thea nodded back. It was a silent greeting, an acknowledgement of their shared presence in this strange, forgotten place. He gestured with his head towards the plaza, a silent question. "Are you just passing through?" She gestured with her shears towards the path ahead. A silent answer. "Yes." He seemed to relax a little more. He walked over to a low stone bench near the petrified tree and sat down, setting his device carefully beside him. He did not speak, but his posture was an invitation for her to do the same. After a moment's hesitation, Thea walked over and sat on the other end of the bench, keeping a respectful distance between them. For a while, they sat in a shared, comfortable silence. It was a relief not to be completely alone anymore. The presence of another living, breathing person made the vast, empty landscape feel a little less lonely. Finally, he decided to break the silence. He pointed to his device. "Echo collector," he said. His voice was quiet and a little hoarse, as if he was not used to talking. He then pointed at her shears. "Arborist," she replied, her own voice feeling strange in her throat. He nodded, as if that explained everything. An echo collector. The name made sense. He collected the faint sounds of the past that still lingered in the air. He seemed to see the question in her eyes. To demonstrate, he picked up his device. He tinkered with a few small dials on the glass jar, and then a sound came from it. It was the clear, distinct sound of a small metal coin being dropped on stone. It was a tiny, unimportant sound, but to hear it so clearly in this silent place was magical. He smiled, a small, sad smile. He explained in short, simple sentences that his job was to gather these lost sounds. Most were meaningless, like the coin, but some were precious. He was searching for one in particular. It was the last echo of a lullaby his mother used to sing to him before she vanished into the outer lands years ago. He had dedicated his life to finding it, to piecing it together one faint, forgotten note at a time. His quest, like hers, was born of love and loss. Thea felt a sudden kinship with this stranger. She understood his search for a piece of his past. She showed him her emotional compass, explaining that she was not listening for sounds, but feeling for emotions. She told him she was searching for a forgotten place of joy. The young man, whose name was Finn, looked at the compass with fascination. He seemed to understand immediately. He pointed back towards the echo lane she had just escaped. He said that place was very loud to him, full of the sound of weeping, even though it was silent to the ear. Thea held up her compass, and the needle spun wildly, confirming the emotional chaos he could hear. They both looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. He could hear what she could only feel. She could feel what he could not hear. Their skills were different, but they were complementary. They were both searching for something precious that had been lost to time. Finn looked at the path ahead, into the deepening gloom. He told her that the lands beyond this plaza were even more unstable, even more dangerous. He had been trying to navigate them alone for a long time. He then looked at her, a silent question in his serious eyes. Thea understood. This place was too vast and too dangerous to face alone. A partner, even a stranger, would make the journey safer. An echo collector and an arborist. A boy listening for the past, and a girl searching for a future. It made a strange kind of sense. She did not need to think about it for long. She gave a single, decisive nod. Finn's serious expression softened with a look of profound relief. He nodded back. A partnership was formed, not with a handshake or with promises, but with a simple, shared understanding in the quiet heart of a forgotten city. They did not speak again for a while. They simply shared the space, the silence between them, no longer the silence of loneliness, but the quiet beginning of a companionship. When they had both rested, they stood up. Thea took the lead, her emotional compass in hand, and Finn walked beside her, his strange mechanical ear tilted towards the world, listening for its secrets. Together, they left the plaza and walked deeper into the gloom, two small figures on an impossible quest. Chapter 5. The River of Sorrows. Traveling with Finn was a quiet and focused affair. They did not speak much. Words felt heavy and unnecessary in the vast, silent landscapes they moved through. Their communication was one of gestures, of shared glances, of a deep and instinctual understanding of each other's purpose. Thea would take the lead, her eyes fixed on the emotional compass. The needle had found a more definite direction now, a faint but steady pull towards a distant, unknown source of joy. It was a fragile thread of hope in the immense gloom, and she followed it with unwavering determination. Finn walked beside her or just behind her, his own attention focused on his echo collector. He would hold the wide brass funnel up to the air, his head tilted, listening. Most of the time, he heard nothing but the low, humming silence of forgotten places. But occasionally, he would stop, motioning for Thea to be still. He would close his eyes, his face a mask of intense concentration, and he would capture a faint, fleeting sound, the spectral chime of a long-vanished clock tower, the whisper of wind through the leaves of a tree that had turned to dust centuries ago, the ghostly sigh of a closing door. Each sound was a tiny, precious jewel of the past, and he would trap it in the glowing blue jar of his device. Their partnership quickly proved its worth. Finn's acute hearing could detect the telltale sounds of an unstable area long before Thea's compass would register the emotional chaos. He would hear the faint, discordant hum of a looping memory and guide them away from a potential echo lane before they were forced into it. In turn, Thea's compass could feel the subtle emotional terrain, allowing her to find paths that were not just physically clear, but emotionally calm. She could sense a path that was tinged with old fear and led them along a parallel route that felt of peaceful resignation instead. They learned to trust each other's senses completely, navigating the treacherous and shifting world with a shared awareness that was far greater than their own. They were a team, two lonely travelers who had found a way to make the vast, empty world a little less daunting. They shared their food in silence, sitting back to back for warmth and security as they rested. They took turns keeping watch while the other slept, a silent promise of protection in the deep, starless twilight. The landscapes they passed through grew more and more surreal, more detached from the solid reality of the world Thea had known. They walked through a forest where the trees were not made of wood, but of a dark, smoky glass. They were entirely silent, their brittle leaves making no sound in the wind. The forest floor was carpeted in a thick, soft moss that glowed with a faint, cold blue light illuminating their path. They saw strange, gentle creatures made of woven mist that drifted through the glass trees, their large, dark eyes watching Thea and Finn with a sad, ancient curiosity before dissolving back into the air. Later, they had to cross a vast, open plain of cracked, dry earth. The ground was littered with thousands of broken pieces of what looked like porcelain masks, each one painted with a different, silent expression: joy, sorrow, anger, surprise. It was a field of discarded feelings, and they had to tread carefully to avoid stepping on the sharp, broken edges. Throughout this long and strange journey, Thea's compass pulled her steadily forward. The needles twitching became a more confident, sustained pull. The echo of joy they were following was growing stronger. Thea could feel it now, even without the compass. It was a faint, warm feeling on the very edge of her perception, like the distant promise of a sunrise in a world that had never known one. The hope stone in her pocket remained a constant, steady warmth against her skin. The feeling that she was on the right path grew stronger with each passing day. The journey was hard, but it felt meaningful. It was a pilgrimage. After many days of walking, after crossing the glass forest and the plain of broken masks, they came to the edge of a great chasm. The land simply ended, falling away into a deep, misty abyss. And at the bottom of this chasm, Flowing slowly and silently from one end of the horizon to the other was a river. This was no ordinary river. It was wide, perhaps half a mile across, and it did not flow with water. It flowed with a thick, shimmering silver liquid that seemed to move with a life of its own. It was beautiful, but its beauty was a cold and sorrowful one. A thick white mist rose from its surface, a mist that was not made of water vapor. It was a mist of pure, concentrated sadness. As it drifted up from the chasm, it radiated a powerful melancholy that was so intense it felt like a physical force. Thea felt it instantly, a heavy blanket of sorrow settling over her heart, making her feel tired and hopeless. Even from this distance, the river's influence was strong. This was the River of Sorrows. Finn had heard of it in old travelers' tales. He explained in his quiet, sparse words that the river was made of all the unshed tears of the living world, all the grief that had been held back, all the sadness that had never been expressed. It was a physical manifestation of heartbreak, and it was the great barrier that separated the outer districts from the truly forgotten lands beyond. There was no bridge. There were no boats. The river, he said, was the ultimate test for any traveler. Its powerful aura of despair could drain a person's will, trapping them on its banks until they wasted away, their own sadness adding to the river's flow. They stood at the edge of the chasm for a long time, looking down at the slow, silent silver river. The task before them seemed impossible. How could they cross a river of pure sadness? The mist rising from it was already making Thea feel a deep, weary ache in her bones. The memory of her grandmother's passing, a grief she had learned to carry, suddenly felt fresh and raw again. She saw Finn's shoulders slump slightly, his usual focused energy seeming to drain away. He was probably thinking of his lost mother, his own long-held sorrow resonating with the powerful grief of the river. They had to get away from the edge. They backed away from the chasm, the feeling of oppressive sadness lessening slightly as they moved. They made a small, cold camp in a grove of petrified, weeping willows, their stone branches hanging low to the ground. They knew they could not stay here for long. The constant proximity to the river would eventually wear them down completely. They had to find a way to cross, and they had to find it quickly. Finn, who had collected more stories and scraps of knowledge on his travels than Thea, was the one who remembered the legend. The old tales said that the river rejected anything built of ordinary physical matter. A wooden boat would become waterlogged with sorrow and sink instantly. A stone bridge would crumble under the weight of so much grief. The only way to cross the river, the legend claimed, was to build a vessel from something that was its opposite, something that could float on a sea of sadness. They needed to build a boat made of joy. The idea seemed absurd, impossible. How could they build something solid out of an emotion? But in this strange, dreamlike world, the impossible often became the only logical solution. They had no other choice but to try. Their quest became a new one, to search the riverbank, this sad and desolate land, for tangible, physical echoes of happiness. For days, they walked the length of the chasm's edge. The work was slow and disheartening. The land near the River of Sorrows was, Unsurprisingly, not a place where joy had often thrived. The landscape was bleak and gray. The plants that grew here were twisted and thorny. The few echoes Finn could find were overwhelmingly sad. The faint sound of weeping, the sigh of a lonely traveler, the whisper of a final, regretful goodbye. Thea's compass was useless here, its needle spinning erratically, overwhelmed by the powerful sorrow emanating from the river below. They had to rely on their own senses, their own intuition. They searched for anything, any small sign of light in the overwhelming gloom. The constant exposure to the river's melancholy was taking its toll. They both grew quiet and withdrawn. The easy companionship they had developed felt strained. They had to take frequent sips of Thea's courage dew just to keep their spirits from being completely extinguished. The hopestone in Thea's pocket grew cooler, a worrying sign that her own hope was beginning to fade. It was Finn who found the first piece. He had wandered into a small, sheltered cove, a place where the wind did not blow so harshly. He called out to Thea, his voice tinged with a cautious excitement. Lying on the ground, half buried in the gray dust, was a small, crystalline object. It was a solidified echo of a child's laughter. It looked like a piece of spun sugar, light and airy, and filled with 1,000 tiny, shimmering bubbles of light. When Thea picked it up, it was almost weightless, and it felt warm to the touch. It hummed with a faint, happy energy. Holding it pushed back the river's sadness, creating a small, warm bubble of peace around them. It was a tiny thing, no bigger than her fist, but it was proof. Joy could be found here. It was rare, but it existed. This small discovery was enough to rekindle their hope. Thea's hopestone grew warm again, and they continued their search with renewed vigor. Now that they knew what to look for, they began to find more. They learned to look in the unexpected places, the small nooks and forgotten corners where a moment of happiness might have been sheltered from the overwhelming sadness of the area. Tucked into the hollow of an old dead tree, they found the lingering warmth of a lover's embrace. It was not a physical object, but a tangible field of warm, golden light, about the size of a small blanket. Thea used her shears to carefully cut the edges of the light, and they found they could fold it like a piece of soft, warm fabric. In another spot, hidden under a flat gray rock, they discovered a collection of old, happy songs that had solidified into thin, shimmering threads of silver and gold. Finn was overjoyed. He captured a few of the threads in his echo jar, but they left the rest, realizing they needed their physical substance. They gathered the threads carefully, winding them into a strong, shining cord. They worked for what felt like weeks, slowly and painstakingly gathering their strange building materials. It was a process of reverse archaeology, of finding the fossilized remains of happiness. They found solidified echoes of praise, which were strong and straight like planks of wood. They found the memory of a shared secret joke, which had taken the form of a light, buoyant, bubble-like substance that was perfect for providing lift. They found the faint, pleasant scent of a home-cooked meal, which they managed to capture in a large, waxy leaf. It had a dense, comforting quality that would be good for sealing gaps. The process of gathering these joyful things was healing. Each piece of happiness they found was a small victory against the oppressive sorrow of the river. It reminded them that even in the saddest places, joy could leave a mark. It was a powerful lesson. Their bond, which had been strained by the river's influence, grew strong again. They learned to work together seamlessly, their movements and thoughts in perfect sync. Finally, they had enough. They had a large pile of strange, glowing and warm materials. They carried it all to a sheltered spot, a safe distance from the chasm's edge, and began the process of building their raft. It was the strangest boat anyone had ever constructed. They used the strong, straight planks of praise to form the base, lashing them together with the strong, shining cord of happy songs. They built up the sides with the warm, golden fabric of the lover's embrace, creating a low, protective wall. They filled the gaps and sealed the joints with the dense, comforting scent of the home-cooked meal. For buoyancy, they attached the light, airy bubbles of the secret joke to the underside of the raft, where they bobbed and pulsed with a gentle, cheerful energy. The largest piece, the child's laughter, they placed at the very front of the raft like a figurehead. Its warm, happy hum seemed to spread through the entire structure, making the whole thing glow with a soft, inviting light. The raft was small, just big enough for the two of them to sit on with their satchels. It did not look particularly sturdy. It looked like something made from dreams and light. But as they worked on it, they could feel its power. It created a powerful aura of warmth and happiness, an invisible shield that pushed back the cold mist of the river of sorrows. Just standing near it made them feel lighter, more hopeful. When it was finally finished, they stood back and looked at their creation. It was a beautiful, strange thing, a small, glowing island of joy in a land of gray despair. It was a testament to their perseverance, their partnership, and the enduring power of happiness. The time had come to cross. They carefully pushed and carried their strange, light raft to the edge of the chasm. There was a long, sloping path that led down to the riverbank, a path worn smooth by the hopeless feet of countless travelers who had come this far and no further. They navigated the path carefully, their raft surprisingly easy to manage. Finally, they stood on the shore of the River of Sorrows. The silver liquid flowed slowly past, thick and silent. The cold mist swirled around them, but it could not touch them. The warm, joyful aura of their raft kept it at bay. They looked at each other, a shared look of fear and determination. This was the moment of truth. They placed the raft on the surface of the silver river. It did not sink. It floated perfectly, bobbing gently on the slow, sad currents. Its light cast a warm, golden glow on the shimmering surface of the tears. They climbed aboard, settling themselves in the center of the small craft. There were no oars, no sail. They soon discovered that they did not need them. The raft seemed to have a will of its own. The joyful energy it was made of was naturally repelled by the sorrow of the river. It began to drift away from the shore, slowly at first, then picking up a gentle, steady speed, moving towards the opposite bank. The journey across the River of Sorrows was one of the most surreal and beautiful experiences of Thea's life. They floated in perfect silence on a sea of liquid grief, yet they were cocooned in a bubble of warmth and joy. The mist of sadness swirled around them, but it could not penetrate their shield of light. Looking down into the river was like looking into the collective heart of the world. Thea could see faint shimmering shapes moving in the silver depths. The shape of a lost home, the face of a forgotten love, the ghost of a missed opportunity. It was profoundly sad, but from the safety of their raft, it was also beautiful. It was the story of life, of love and loss, all flowing together in one great, silent river. Thea felt a deep sense of peace. The river's sadness no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a fundamental part of the world, just as joy was. They were two sides of the same coin. Her own grief for her grandmother felt different now. It was still there, a quiet ache in her heart, but it was no longer a crushing weight. It was just a part of her own story, a silver thread woven into the fabric of her life. She looked over at Finn. He was staring down into the river, his face calm and thoughtful. Perhaps he was seeing his own sorrow reflected in the depths. Perhaps he was also finding a new way to understand it. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. They simply floated, two small souls on a raft of happiness, finding their way across a river of tears. The opposite bank, which had seemed impossibly far away, grew steadily closer. It was a shoreline of dark, quiet woods, a new and unknown land waiting for them. The Forgotten Lands. The place where her quest could finally be completed. As their raft of joy gently bumped against the far shore, Thea felt the needle of her emotional compass give a strong, sudden lurch, pulling insistently towards the dark woods ahead. They were very, very close now. Chapter 6. The Spectral Fairground. Stepping off the raft and onto the far shore of the River of Sorrows felt like entering a new world. The air was different here. The heavy, sorrowful mist of the river did not follow them. Instead, the atmosphere was still and silent, holding a kind of ancient, peaceful quiet. The ground beneath their feet was soft, a thick carpet of dark, springy moss that muffled their footsteps completely. They had arrived in the Forgotten Lands. This was a place beyond the shifting chaos of the outer districts, a realm where things did not just change or disappear. They simply faded into a gentle, permanent state of memory. They pulled their small, glowing raft of joy fully onto the shore, its warm light a comforting presence in the deep twilight of the new landscape. It had served its purpose, a beautiful temporary vessel that had carried them through the impossible. They looked back across the shimmering silver river at the bleak gray lands they had left behind. It already seemed a lifetime away. Before them stood a vast, dark forest. The trees were ancient and enormous, their trunks thick and gnarled, their high branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out the faint light of the violet sky. But these trees were not ordinary. They were not alive in the way Thea understood it. They were in a state between life and memory. Their bark was the color of faded photographs, and their leaves were thin and translucent, like panes of smoky glass. A faint, Silvery light seemed to cling to them, giving the whole forest a dreamlike, ethereal quality. Thea held up her emotional compass. The needle was no longer twitching or wavering. It pointed with a strong, unwavering certainty into the heart of the silent forest. The echo of joy was close now, a powerful and constant pulse that she could feel in the air, a low, happy hum just beneath the threshold of hearing. She knew, with a deep and certain instinct, that they were on the final stage of their journey. Finn, too, could sense the change. He held his echo collector up, sweeping it slowly through the air. A look of wonder crossed his face. He told Thea that the air here was not silent. It was filled with the faintest, most delicate sounds he had ever heard. He called them the whispers of time. He let her listen through a small earpiece attached to his device. Thea was astounded. She heard the soft, crystalline sound of a snowflake melting on a branch 1,000 years ago. She heard the gentle sigh of a sleeping animal from a forgotten age. It was the sound of a world at peace, a world of memories that were not trapped or distressed, but had simply come to rest. This was not a dangerous place like the echo lanes. It was a sacred place, a library of moments that had faded from the waking world. They entered the forest, their path guided by Thea's compass, and their steps silenced by the thick moss. The trees towered over them like ancient sleeping giants. The only light came from the silvery glow of the trees themselves and from small, pale flowers that grew in clusters on the forest floor, each one shedding a soft, white light like a tiny lantern. The effect was magical, like walking through a cavern of stars. They moved with a sense of reverence, careful not to disturb the profound peace of the place. The journey through the forest was long, but it was not arduous. The path was clear, as if it had been waiting for them. The air was cool and clean. There were no obstacles, no dangers. The only challenge was the overwhelming sense of age and quiet. It was a place that invited introspection, a place that made one feel very small in the grand, slow passage of time. As they walked, Thea's compass began to pulse in her hand, a gentle rhythmic beat, like a slow, happy heart. The feeling of joy in the air grew stronger and stronger. It was not a loud, boisterous joy. It was a deep, warm, contented happiness, the kind that soaks into the very stones of a place and remains forever. She knew they were getting very close. The pull of the compass was almost magnetic now, tugging her insistently forward. The forest began to thin, the massive trees giving way to smaller, more delicate ones. Up ahead, she could see a change in the light, a soft, multicolored glow that filtered through the last of the trees. The happy hum she had been feeling grew into a faint, distant melody. Finn heard it too. He stopped, his eyes wide, listening intently. It was music. It was the faint, ghostly sound of a carousel organ playing a cheerful, lilting tune. They stepped out of the forest and into a large, open clearing, and the sight before them made them both stop in their tracks, their breath catching in their throats. Sprawled before them, under the eternal twilight of the forgotten lands, were the ghostly, translucent ruins of an old seaside fairground. It was beautiful. Every structure was made of a shimmering, semi-transparent light, as if it were a memory projected onto the air. A magnificent silent Ferris wheel stood against the violet sky, its empty cars glowing with soft pastel colors, pink, blue, and yellow. A long, winding roller coaster track swooped and curved through the clearing, its ghostly structure held up by delicate, glowing trestles. There were small, charming booths with striped awnings, their signs faded but still readable. Popcorn, fortune teller, test your strength. And in the center of it all was a magnificent two-tiered carousel, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop, their jeweled saddles and bridles glittering with a soft inner light. This was the source of the joy. The entire place was saturated with it. The air was thick with the happy energy of a million forgotten moments of fun and laughter and wonder. It was a monument to happiness. Thea looked at her compass. The crystal needle was glowing with a brilliant white light pointing directly at the center of the fairground. This was the place. She had found it. A wave of profound relief and gratitude washed over her, so powerful it made her knees feel weak. After all the hardship, after all the fear and the doubt, she had made it. She had fulfilled the first part of her promise. She looked at Finn. He was staring at the carousel, a look of stunned, rapturous disbelief on his face. The ghostly music was coming from there. It was faint, but it was the most beautiful and complete melody he had captured on his entire journey. They walked slowly into the spectral fairground, their footsteps making no sound on the soft, mossy ground that had grown up around the rides and booths. It was like walking into a dream. As they moved through the clearing, faint whispers of the past swirled around them. They could feel the phantom thrill of the roller coaster as they passed beneath its tracks. They could smell the sweet, ghostly scent of spun sugar near the popcorn booth. They could hear the faint, distant sound of children's laughter and happy shouts, like echoes trapped in amber. This was not a haunted place. It was a hallowed place. It was a sanctuary for happy memories. Thea felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was a good place, a kind place. It was exactly the sort of place her grandmother would have loved. Her task now was to find the one specific spot, the epicenter of her grandmother's happiest forgotten memory. The whole fairground was a place of joy, but she needed to find the heart of her grandmother's joy within it. She took the small leather pouch from her satchel and carefully took out the memory seed. She held it in the palm of her hand. The tiny black sphere, which had been cool for the entire journey, was now faintly but distinctly warm. Kale had told her it would guide her, that it would react to the specific emotional frequency of the memories it held within it. She closed her hand around it and began to walk, letting the seed and her own intuition be her guide. Finn stayed near the carousel, completely mesmerized by the music, carefully adjusting his device to capture the pure, perfect notes of the old song. He gave Thea a nod of encouragement, understanding that this last part of her journey was one she had to take alone. Thea walked slowly through the fairground, her senses open to every subtle shift in the emotional atmosphere. She let the seed in her hand lead the way. She walked past the Test Your Strength booth, where the ghostly image of a large bell flickered at the top of a pole. The seed in her hand stayed the same temperature. She walked along the edge of the roller coaster track, the faint echoes of excited screams brushing past her like a breeze. The seed did not change. She passed the fortune teller's booth, a small, mysterious tent made of deep purple light, a crystal ball glowing softly on a table inside. Still, nothing. The joy in all these places was real, but it was not the specific memory she was looking for. The warmth of the seed was a constant, low hum, but it was not getting stronger. She began to feel a small prickle of doubt. What if she had come all this way only to fail at the final moment? What if the memory was too faint, too faded to find? She took a deep breath, pushing the doubt away. She touched the hope stone in her pocket. It was still warm. She had not come this far to give up now. She closed her eyes and tried to picture her grandmother, not as the old wise woman she had known, but as a young girl, full of life and hope. What would a young Elspeth have loved most in a place like this? She opened her eyes, and her gaze fell upon the carousel. It was the heart of the fairground, the source of the beautiful, gentle music. It glowed more brightly than any of the other rides. Its 2 tiers of painted animals, a silent, joyful parade. She felt a pull towards it, a sense of rightness. The seed in her hand grew noticeably warmer. She walked towards the carousel. The ghostly music grew a little louder, a little clearer. It was a sweet, simple melody that spoke of innocence and happy days. The carousel was a masterpiece of light and memory. The horses were magnificent, each one unique. Some had flowing manes of spun moonlight. Others had saddles decorated with glowing jewels. There were other animals too, a proud lion with a gentle face, a graceful swan with arching wings, a whimsical sea dragon with scales of shimmering green light. They were all frozen in place, but they felt full of life, as if they might start moving at any moment. Thea walked around the entire circumference of the carousel, her hand outstretched, almost touching the painted flanks of the ghostly animals. The seed in her palm grew warmer and warmer with every step. She was on the right path. The memory was here. She stopped. She was standing in front of a particular horse. It was not the most ornate or the most magnificent. It was a simple, elegant horse, painted a soft, pale blue. Its saddle was a simple, unadorned silver, and its eyes were gentle and kind. There was nothing outwardly special about it, but the seed in Thea's hand was now intensely hot. It was not a burning heat, but a deep, powerful warmth that pulsed in time with the carousel's gentle music. This was the spot. The memory was here, connected to this pale blue horse. She stood before it, her heart beating with a mixture of excitement and reverence. She closed her eyes, holding the warm seed up in her open palm. She tried to clear her mind, to be open to whatever the place wanted to show her. Slowly, a vision began to form in her mind's eye. It was not a clear image, more like a watercolor painting, its colors soft and its edges blurred. She saw a young girl with long golden hair, her face bright with a shy, happy smile. It was her grandmother, Elspeth, but so young, barely older than Thea was now. She was sitting on the pale blue horse of the carousel. The carousel was moving, not in reality, but in the memory, turning slowly to the rhythm of the gentle music. A young man with kind eyes was standing on the platform next to her horse, his hand resting gently on hers. They were not speaking. They were just looking at each other, their faces filled with the quiet, overwhelming joy of a first love. Thea then saw the moment the memory had crystallized around. As the carousel reached the highest point of its gentle up and down motion, the young man leaned in and gave Elspeth a shy, sweet kiss. It was a small, simple moment, but it was filled with so much hope and happiness that it had left an echo powerful enough to last for ages, even after the world had forgotten it completely. A single tear rolled down Thea's cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of profound, beautiful connection. She was witnessing the happiest moment of her grandmother's youth. She was seeing the beginning of a love that would last a lifetime, the love that would eventually lead to her own existence. She felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. She understood now why this memory was so powerful. It was a moment of pure, unblemished joy, a perfect beginning. She opened her eyes. The vision faded, but the feeling of warm, hopeful love remained, clinging to the air around the pale blue horse. She looked down at the soft, mossy ground at the base of the carousel. This was the soil she had been searching for. This was the place where the memory was strongest. This was where the new beginning had to be planted. With hands that were steady and sure, she knelt down on the ground, ready to complete the final act of her long and difficult journey. Chapter 7. The Planting. Thea knelt on the soft, dark moss before the pale blue carousel horse. The vision of her young grandmother, so full of shy, hopeful joy, had faded from her mind, but the feeling it left behind was as real and tangible as the ground beneath her knees. The air around her was thick with that beautiful, ancient memory. It was a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, a sweetness that had no scent. It was the pure, concentrated essence of a perfect, happy moment, preserved here in this quiet, forgotten place. She felt as though she were in a sacred space, a tiny, invisible cathedral built from a single, cherished memory. For a long moment, she did not move. She simply breathed in that gentle, loving energy, letting it fill the parts of her that had felt empty for so long. The grief for her grandmother was still there, a quiet, silvery thread in the fabric of her being. But here, in this place, it was not a source of pain. It was a source of connection. It was the thread that had led her all this way. She was not just an arborist on a quest. She was a granddaughter visiting the beautiful, secret garden of her grandmother's heart. She looked at the ground before her. It was different from the surrounding moss. Here, directly in front of the blue horse, the ground was a patch of fine, dark soil that seemed to drink the soft light of the fairground. It was not soil in the way she knew it from the grove, which was rich with the energy of living souls. This soil was different. It was made of time and memory itself. She could feel a faint, gentle pulse coming from it, the slow, sleeping heartbeat of the joy that was stored within. This was the place. There was no doubt. This was the soil that could awaken the seed. Her long, arduous journey was over. Now her true work, the work of an arborist, was about to begin. The planting of this seed was not a simple task of digging a hole and covering it up. It was a ritual. It was an act of profound hope and deep love. It had to be done with care, with reverence, with all the skill and empathy she possessed. She began by preparing the space. She did not use a spade or a trowel. Such tools felt too rough, too intrusive for this delicate place. Instead, she used her hands. She gently brushed away the few strands of dark moss that encroached on the edges of the special soil. Her fingers were slow and deliberate, her touch as light as a falling leaf. She wanted to disturb the peace of this place as little as possible. The soil itself was soft and fine, like a mixture of dark, velvety dust and compacted light. As her fingers brushed across its surface, tiny, faint sparks of golden light would flicker for a moment before fading, like distant, sleeping fireflies. It was as if she were touching a living, dreaming thing. She cleared a small, circular area, creating a clean, dark canvas for her work. The air around her was still. The only sound, the faint, constant, and beautiful melody of the carousel organ. Next, she took out her moonlight shears. They were not a tool for digging, but they were a tool of her trade, a part of who she was. She held them in her hand, their cool, shimmering blades a stark contrast to the warm, dark soil. She did not intend to cut anything. She used the very tip of one of the blades to gently score the surface of the prepared circle. She drew a simple, elegant spiral, starting from the outside and curving gently inwards to the center. It was the ancient symbol of life, of growth, of a journey that begins outward and leads to the center of the self. The blade of solidified moonlight moved through the memory soil with a soft, whispering sound, leaving a thin, glowing line of silver light in its wake. The silver spiral on the dark ground looked like a tiny sleeping galaxy. It was her way of blessing the ground, of marking it with the symbol of her purpose as an arborist. It was an offering of her own identity to this sacred place. With the ground prepared, it was time to create the space for the seed. She put her shears aside and once again used her hands. She placed her palms flat on the center of the silver spiral. The soil was incredibly warm now, a deep, comforting heat that flowed into her hands and up her arms. It felt like the warmth of her grandmother's own hand holding hers. She closed her eyes and focused all her intention, all her love, all her hope for this new beginning into her touch. She did not dig. She gently pressed down, and the strange, light-filled soil yielded to her touch. It parted without crumbling, moving aside as if it were a thick, willing liquid. Slowly, carefully, she created a small, perfectly round depression in the very center of the spiral. The inside of the small hole glowed with a soft, golden light, the concentrated joy of the memory she had witnessed. It was not a hole of empty darkness, but a nest of pure, warm light. It was ready. During all of this, Finn had been standing by the carousel, a silent, respectful witness. He understood the gravity of Thea's actions and had kept his distance, not wanting to intrude. But he was not idle. He had been completely captivated by the music. His entire life had been a search for faint, broken echoes, for tiny fragments of sound that he had to piece together like a complex puzzle. But the music here was different. It was whole. It was pure. The carousel organ played its gentle, lilting tune without pause, a perfect, unbroken loop of melody. He had his echo collector pointed directly at the heart of the carousel, his fingers busy making tiny, precise adjustments to the dials on the glowing blue jar. He was tuning his device to the exact frequency of the music, filtering out all the other faint whispers of the fairground, trying to capture the song in its most perfect form. He was as focused on his task as Thea was on hers. He was a collector, and this was the most beautiful, pristine specimen he had ever found. The soft blue light in his collection jar pulsed gently in time with the music, a sign that he was succeeding. Thea now reached into the small leather pouch where she kept the seed. Her fingers closed around the tiny, smooth sphere. She brought it out and held it in her open palm. For the entire journey, it had been a cool, dark, silent object. But here, in this place of powerful, joyful memory, it had come alive. It was no longer a void that absorbed the light. A faint, deep, inner light now pulsed within it, a tiny dark star beginning to awaken. It was intensely warm in her hand, its heat a familiar, loving presence. She held the seed over the glowing nest she had prepared in the soil. She took a deep, steadying breath. This was the moment. Everything had led to this. All the miles she had walked, all the dangers she had faced, all the sorrow she had overcome. It was all for this single, simple action. She thought of her grandmother's golden tree, of its magnificent, life-giving light. Then she thought of the cold, dark husk it had become. She thought of the promise of this seed, the impossible chance to turn that ending into a new beginning. Her heart was full, not with sadness, but with a profound and powerful sense of purpose. As she lowered her hand, preparing to place the seed in the earth, a strange and wonderful thing began to happen. The moment her intention became absolute, the moment she committed to the act of planting, the fairground itself seemed to react. A wave of warmth, a visible, shimmering pulse of golden energy spread out from the spot where she knelt. It was not a violent explosion, but a gentle, silent blossoming of light and energy. The entire spectral fairground, which had been glowing with a soft, gentle light, suddenly flared with a brilliant, breathtaking intensity. The pale pastel colors of the Ferris wheel cars became deep and vibrant. The swooping tracks of the roller coaster shone like rivers of molten gold. The little striped awnings on the booths looked as if they had been freshly painted. Every structure, every ride, every ghostly detail sharpened and became, for a single magical moment, almost solid. It was as if the entire place was waking from a long, peaceful sleep, roused by this powerful act of love and remembrance. The music of the carousel swelled, the gentle, lilting tune becoming a rich, full, and joyous symphony. And in that beautiful, chaotic surge of sound and light, Finn heard it. It was a new sound, a new melody weaving its way through the powerful notes of the main organ. It was a simple, clear, and achingly beautiful tune, played on what sounded like a set of crystal bells within the spectral organ. It was a lullaby. It was the melody he had been searching for his entire life. It was not a fragment, not a faint echo. It was whole, perfect, and played with a loving clarity that brought tears to his eyes. His mother's lullaby. He had not heard it since he was a small boy, but he recognized it instantly. It was the sound of safety. It was the sound of home. It was the sound of a love that had never truly left him. His hands, which had been so steady, began to tremble. With a desperate, focused energy, he made the final, crucial adjustment to his device. His entire being narrowed down to this one single purpose: to capture this perfect, precious sound. The blue light in his collection jar flared, pulsing with a brilliant, steady rhythm as it drank in the beautiful, long-lost melody. He had found it. He had finally found it. At the very same moment, at the peak of this surge of energy, Thea gently placed the memory seed into the glowing golden nest in the soil. The instant the dark seed touched the warm, joyful earth, another pulse of energy was released, this one even more powerful than the first. A wave of pure white light shot up from the ground, a silent, beautiful explosion that washed over the entire fairground. The air filled with a chorus of happy sounds, the clear, bright laughter of children, the joyous shouts of families, the warm murmur of 1,000 happy conversations. The sweet smell of spun sugar and popcorn became so real, so intense, that Thea could almost taste it. She felt a profound sense of connection to all the joy that had ever existed in this place. A happiness so powerful, it was a living, breathing force. She felt her grandmother's presence not as a memory, but as a living part of this beautiful, joyous energy. She was not gone. She was here. She was everywhere. The intense flare of light and sound lasted for only a few heartbeats. Then, just as gently as it had arrived, it began to recede. The brilliant lights of the fairground softened, returning to their usual gentle, translucent glow. The rich, symphonic music of the carousel quieted, returning to its soft, lilting melody. The chorus of laughter and happy voices faded back into faint, gentle whispers. The sweet smells dissipated, leaving only a faint, pleasant memory in the air. The fairground settled back into its peaceful, dreamlike slumber. But it was not exactly the same as before. The colors seemed a little brighter, the music a little sweeter, the whole place infused with a new sense of peace, as if it had been given a long, satisfying drink of pure, happy energy. Thea looked down at the spot where she had placed the seed. The brilliant white light was gone. With gentle, careful movements, she pushed the warm, sparkling soil back into the hole, covering the seed. The soil seemed to fold over it, embracing it like a soft blanket. She smoothed the surface with her palm, leaving no trace of the hole she had made, only the faint, shimmering silver spiral she had drawn on the surface. The act was complete. Her mission was fulfilled. A feeling of profound peace settled over her, a quiet, deep contentment that she had not felt since before her grandmother's tree began to fade. The long, heavy weight of her quest lifted from her shoulders. She had done it. She had carried this tiny, dark seed across a strange and dangerous world, and she had planted it in the heart of a forgotten joy. Whatever happened next was out of her hands. She stayed there, kneeling on the ground, for a long time, simply looking at the spot. The soil where she had planted the seed did not return to its normal, dark state. A soft, gentle light began to pulse from beneath the surface. It was not the warm, golden light of the memory. It was a new light, a clean, pure, silver light, like the color of a distant star or the first light of a new moon. It pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a tiny, sleeping heart. It was a light of promise, of potential, of a new life waiting to begin. It was not the same light her grandmother had possessed, and Thea understood that this was as it should be. This would not be a ghost, a recreation of what was lost. This would be something new, something that carried the love of the past, but would grow into its own unique future. A quiet smile touched Thea's lips, the first true, happy smile she had smiled in a very long time. She had not just buried a seed, she had planted a future. And in doing so, she had found a way to heal herself. The journey had been about her grandmother, but it had also been about her. It had been about learning that love does not truly die. It simply changes form. And from the rich, fertile soil of memory, a new beginning could always, always grow. Chapter 8. A New Light in the Grove. The soft, silver light pulsed from the soil, a quiet and steady beacon in the gentle twilight of the spectral fairground. Thea watched it for a long time, the rhythmic beat a soothing presence. Her work here was done. The seed was planted, nestled in the heart of a powerful, joyful memory, and it had accepted its new home. The pulse of silver light was the first sign of a new life taking root, a tiny, sleeping heart beginning to beat. A profound sense of peace settled deep within her, a calm she had not felt in what seemed like a lifetime. The heavy cloak of her grief, which she had carried for so long, had finally been laid to rest. In its place was a quiet, gentle acceptance and a fragile, beautiful hope for the future. She had honored her grandmother, and in doing so, she had found her own way forward. Finn approached her then, moving with a quiet reverence that respected the sacredness of the moment. He had taken his large goggles off, and his eyes, which usually held a look of intense, searching concentration, were soft and full of a quiet, wondering joy. He held his echo collector in his hands as if it were the most precious object in the world. The small glass jar at its base was no longer glowing with its usual faint blue light. It now pulsed with a brilliant, steady silver light that matched the light coming from the ground where Thea had planted the seed. He knelt beside her, his gaze shifting from the pulsing earth to the glowing jar in his hands. He did not need to say anything. Thea could see it on his face. He had found what he was looking for. He had found his mother's lullaby. The fairground had given them both a priceless gift, a piece of their past that would allow them to move into the future. They stayed there for a while longer, two silent figures kneeling in a place of forgotten joy, each lost in their own peaceful thoughts. The fairground seemed to hold them in a gentle embrace, its soft lights and sweet distant music a comforting blanket. But they both knew they could not stay forever. This was a place of memory, a place of rest. Their lives, their futures, were waiting for them back in the world of the living. It was time to go home. The thought of the long journey back was not a daunting one. The path ahead no longer felt like a dangerous, unknown trial. It felt like a simple walk home. The world that had once seemed so terrifying and chaotic now felt different. They were different. They were stronger, wiser, and no longer entirely alone. Their departure from the fairground was as quiet and respectful as their arrival. They stood, and Thea gave one last long look at the pulsing silver light in the ground. She whispered a silent thank you and a quiet goodbye to the spirit of her grandmother, whose love had guided her here. Then they turned their backs on the glowing carousel and the silent Ferris wheel and walked back towards the edge of the dark, ethereal forest. As they stepped back under the canopy of the ancient silvery trees, Thea glanced back over her shoulder. The fairground was still there, a beautiful, dreamlike vision, its gentle music a faint, sweet whisper on the still air. It was a perfect, secret place, and she knew she would carry the memory of it in her heart forever. The journey back through the forest was peaceful. The path seemed clearer now, the soft light from the glowing flowers brighter and more welcoming. They walked in a comfortable silence, their hearts full. When they reached the shore of the River of Sorrows, their small raft of joy was still there, waiting for them, its gentle light a warm and welcoming beacon. It had not faded or diminished. If anything, its glow seemed a little stronger, as if it had absorbed some of the profound peace of the forgotten lands. They climbed aboard, and the raft once again carried them silently and safely across the shimmering silver river of tears. This time, looking down into the sad, beautiful depths did not bring a single pang of sorrow. Thea looked at the ghostly images of loss and heartbreak, and she felt only a deep, quiet compassion. Sadness was a part of life, just as joy was. They were both beautiful in their own way. The river was no longer an obstacle. It was just a part of the landscape of the world, a river that had to be crossed. Once they reached the other side, the bleak gray lands that had once seemed so oppressive and disheartening now looked different. They were still gray, still desolate. But Thea saw them with new eyes. She saw the quiet beauty in the twisted, thorny plants, their resilience in a harsh land. She saw the stark elegance of the bare, gray stones. The journey had not just changed her on the inside, it had changed the way she saw the world outside. The shifting, chaotic landscapes of the outer districts no longer felt threatening. They felt alive, full of a strange, dreamlike energy. With Finn's acute hearing and her own newfound confidence, they navigated the unstable paths with an easy, practiced grace. They skirted the edges of the echo lanes, not with fear, but with a respectful caution. They were no longer intruders in a dangerous land. They were simply travelers passing through. The journey, which had taken so long and had been so full of hardship on the way out, seemed to pass much more quickly on the way back. Their steps were lighter, their spirits unburdened. Before they knew it, they began to see the familiar soft-edged shapes of the buildings of the city proper. The misty, unstable structures gave way to the grander, more solid forms of the inner city. The cobblestone paths became more uniform, the air less wild and more still. They were approaching the heart of Penumbra. They were almost home. They finally reached the point where their paths had to diverge. Finn's journey would take him to a different part of the city, to the quiet, dusty archives where the echo collectors stored their precious, captured sounds. Thea's path led back to the soft, glowing lights of the Grove of Lucent Souls. They stopped at a crossroads, the violet sky above them streaked with slow, shimmering rivers of silver light. It was time to say goodbye. They stood facing each other, two unlikely companions who had shared an impossible journey and had found what they were looking for. There was no need for grand speeches or emotional farewells. Their bond was a quiet one, forged in shared silence and mutual respect. Finn held up his echo collector. The silver light of the captured lullaby pulsed gently within the glass jar. He told Thea that the sound had given him a peace he had not felt since he was a child. He no longer felt like he was searching for a ghost. He felt like he was carrying a precious gift. He had found the piece of his past he needed to move on. He thanked her, his voice quiet, but full of a deep, sincere gratitude. He told her that he could not have made it without her. Thea simply nodded, a small, warm smile on her face. She told him that his companionship had given her the strength to keep going when she was afraid. She could not have made it without him either. They were two parts of a single, successful quest. Finn gave her a small, final nod, his kind eyes full of warmth. He then turned and walked down his chosen path, his echo collector held carefully in his hands. Thea watched him go until his figure was just a small, dark shape against the misty buildings, and then he was gone. She did not feel sad. She felt a quiet, happy warmth. It was a good parting, a parting of friends who had helped each other and were now ready to walk their own paths. Then she turned and faced her own path, the one that led home. She could see the soft, distant glow of the grove, a gentle, welcoming light on the horizon. With a heart that was full and calm, she began to walk. Stepping back into the Grove of Lucent Souls was like coming home after a long, long time away. The air was soft and smelled of damp earth and night-blooming flowers. The gentle, collective glow of the thousands of soul trees was a warm and comforting embrace. The trees seemed to welcome her back, their crystal leaves chiming with a soft, peaceful melody in the gentle breeze. The grove was exactly as she had left it, yet it felt entirely new. She saw the familiar lights, the well-trodden paths, the quiet, peaceful beauty with fresh eyes, with the perspective of someone who had seen the strange, wild, and forgotten corners of the world. She had a new appreciation for the simple, profound peace of this place. It was her home. It was where she belonged. Kyle was waiting for her at the entrance. He stood with his ancient staff, his weathered face calm and patient, as if he had been standing there, waiting for her all along. He did not ask her if she had succeeded. He did not need to. He could see it in her eyes. He could see the new strength in her posture, the quiet, peaceful confidence that she now carried. He saw a young girl leave on a journey of grief, and he saw a wise young woman return. He simply smiled, a deep, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and he placed a gentle, welcoming hand on her shoulder. It was the same gesture he had used when she left, but this time it was not a gesture of faith. It was a gesture of pride. Thea did not have the seed with her, of course. Its new home was far away in the heart of the spectral fairground, but she had brought a piece of that place back with her. She reached into a special protected pocket of her satchel and took out a small clay pot. Before she had left the fairground, she had carefully scooped up a small amount of the precious, memory-filled soil from the spot where she had planted the seed. It was a living link to that sacred place, a way to bring its essence back with her. The soil in the pot pulsed with the same gentle silver light she had seen in the fairground. It was a tiny, portable beacon of her success and her hope. She and Kyle walked in silence to the center of the grove, to the clean, empty patch of dark earth where her grandmother's magnificent golden tree had once stood. The space had been kept clear, a silent, respectful void waiting for a new purpose. Thea knelt down, just as she had done in the fairground. The ground here was cool and familiar. She placed the small pot in the very center of the empty space. The tiny, pulsing silver light of the soil within it seemed to cast a hopeful glow on the dark earth around it. This was not the final planting. This was a placeholder, a symbol, a promise. The real growth was happening far away, but this small pot would be its anchor in the grove, a focal point for her care and her hope. Life in the grove returned to its familiar, peaceful rhythm. But for Thea, everything was different. Her work was no longer just a duty. It was a calling she understood on a much deeper level. She tended to the thousands of soul trees, not with the simple focus of a gardener, but with the profound compassion of someone who had journeyed through the heart of sorrow and had come out the other side. When she pruned a branch of fear from a struggling tree, she did so with a new, gentle empathy, understanding the courage it took to face that fear. When she watered a sad tree with joyful dews, she did so with a deep appreciation for the precious, healing power of happiness. Her touch was surer, her instincts sharper. She could feel the subtle emotional shifts in the trees more clearly than ever before. She was no longer just a caretaker. She was a healer. The other arborists, and even Kale, noticed the change in her. She had a new quiet wisdom, a depth that was far beyond her years. The grove under her care seemed to thrive, its lights shining a little brighter, its collective melody a little sweeter. Weeks passed, turning into months. Thea visited the small pot in the center of the grove every single day. She would sit with it, sometimes talking to it, telling it stories of her day, just as she had once talked to her grandmother's tree. Other times, she would just sit in silence, her hand resting on the pot, feeling the steady, gentle pulse of the silver light within. It was her daily meditation, her connection to the new life that was growing so far away. The light never faltered. It remained a small, constant, and hopeful presence in the heart of the grove. Then, one evening, as the silver rivers in the violet sky were at their brightest, she arrived at the center of the grove to perform her daily ritual, and she stopped dead in her tracks. Something was different. The soft silver light was no longer confined to the small clay pot. A faint, beautiful silver glow was now coming from the dark, empty earth all around the pot. The light from the soil in the pot had spread, infusing the ground of the grove itself. The connection had been made. The life that had taken root in the forgotten lands had reached across the worlds and had found its home here. Thea knelt down, her heart pounding with a joyous, breathless anticipation. She placed her hand on the glowing earth. It was warm, and it was pulsing with a new, stronger energy. It was a feeling of imminent arrival, of a life about to be born. She did not have to wait long. As she watched, a tiny, brilliant point of silver light pushed its way up through the surface of the dark earth. It was followed by a thin, delicate stem, as fine as a silver thread. The stem grew with a slow, graceful, and visible speed, reaching up towards the violet sky. Two small leaves, made of a perfect, clear crystal, unfurled from the top of the stem. They were not golden, like the leaves of her grandmother's tree. They were a pure, bright, beautiful silver, the color of starlight and new beginnings. A tiny sapling, no bigger than her hand, now stood in the center of the grove, its delicate crystalline leaves catching the light of the other trees and refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It glowed with a soft, gentle, silver light of its own, a light that was full of peace, of resilience, and of a quiet, profound love. Thea looked at the tiny, perfect sapling, and tears of pure, uncomplicated joy filled her eyes and streamed down her face. Her long, impossible journey was truly, finally complete. The story had come full circle. An ending had become a beginning. Loss had been transformed into new life. She reached out with a trembling hand and gently touched one of the tiny silver crystal leaves. It chimed with a clear, sweet, hopeful note, a sound she knew she would treasure for the rest of her life. The story ends here, with Thea kneeling in the heart of the grove, a quiet, happy smile on her face, gently watering the new sapling with her own joyful tears. She understood now that love does not die. It does not disappear. It simply changes form. And in the heart of a loving memory, a new beginning, a new light, a new song can always, always grow.